Now let's go back and look at our spinal cord. I gave you two pathways that were essentially ascending, just to review them for you. Let's take this. If you recall, we filled up the posterior funiculus. This was our posterior funiculus with just one modality. It was kinesthetic sense. This is our posterior funiculus. Just reviewing for a moment before we bring in the descending. These are ascending paths. Get you focused on the brain all of a sudden from out here. Bring it in. And we said we had fasciculus, gracilis, just repeating, and cuneatus. And that these were ascending paths. They're carrying proprioception. Proprioception, also referred to as kinesthetic sense. And then we gave you the pathway. This one I should mention to you because it's an important one, since it takes the whole posterior funiculus for just one type of sensory modality. It will have a dorsal root ganglia. Number 1 will be the DRG. Number 2 will be different. It'll be the medulla. And I just think you should know it, because when you cross the bay, you'll get it. So it'll be the medulla for this path. And number 3 will be what? Thalamus, sure. They've all got to go to the thalamus before they go to the cortex. All right, and then we gave the lateral funiculus, because see, both of these here will be filled up with, these are both right and left posterior funiculus, so we essentially filled almost a third of our white matter. Then we put in here a lateral spinal thalamic tract. We just did it one side, but I want you to get the vision. These are on both sides. So this was our lateral spinal thalamic tract. And what was it carrying? Pain and temperature. Good for you. Right. Terribly important. Pain and temp. And we had our 3 neurons for it, and the first one was where? First one's always the same. Where's the first one? Nobody going to say? The DRG, sure. And then the second one was where? Pardon? No, that was the second one for the proprioception in the posterior funiculus. This one, it's an exception. Where is it? That's correct. And where is the substantia gelatinosa? Terrific. Good for you. I gave them dorsal horn, and specifically substantia. No, my students here take this all casually, and then I see them on campus once they're over there, and they say, my gosh, everything you said, we're getting over here too. And they use it, and so it is important. Substantia gelatinosa. And the third one was where? It's always, yeah, thalamus. Just begin to reason with it. Begin to use it. You will when you start having problems. Then you'll remember all this. So now we'll take all of these from the thalamus to the cortex. And do you remember the sensory ones? Where they were going on the cortex? Postcentral gyrus, right. And this was our postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus. Good for you. So we've got sensory up to the cortex. Now we want to have a response. We've got to take motor back down again. So let's start with our descending path. And these will be motor. And we'll have two of them. We'll have, first one is called cortico-bulbar. Cortico-bulbar. And what does that mean? You'll find with these paths that the first word in a path tells you where it begins. So this is going to begin in the cerebral cortex. And you'll say, what in the world is the bulbar? They used to call the brain stem the bulb. And that's why. These tracts are going from the cortex to the brain stem. And the modern derivation of brain stem, this will include the midbrain and the hindbrain. The part that are in the main stem, not the cerebellum. And so cortico-bulbar tracts, and an example would be, since it's going to cranial nerve nuclei, goes to cranial nerve nuclei. And let's just take the fifth cranial nerve nucleus. Now, who can remember what's the motor component of the fifth cranial nerve? Nobody. Did you chew your breakfast this morning? Did you think what would happen if you didn't have this nerve intact? Muscles of mastication, sure. Muscles of mastication. So this will be coming from the cortex down to the nucleus of the fifth for muscles of mastication. Then the other tract will be the corticospinal tract. So from its name, it's obvious it's going to go from the cortex to the spinal cord. And that's the major one for the rest of your body. So we're going to follow it. We were just introducing cortico-bulbar. These two run together some of the time, not always, but they leave the cortex together. One and two leave cortex together. So where are they leaving? What part of the cortex are they coming from? We took sensory to postcentral gyrus. We're going to take motor from precentral gyrus. Sometimes these work and sometimes they don't. So we're going to follow the cortical spinal tract. And it's going to originate in the precentral gyrus. So here's our central sulcus. And we're going to have a gyrus just in front of it. and that's our precentral gyrus. Can you picture yours in your brain? I mean, you felt all over for your bones and your muscles. How much have you transferred this to your brain? I mean, you can sort of see you're going to central here, precentral would be in front of it, postcentral behind. All right, so now let's follow this. We've got to get down to the spinal cord, so we've got a lot of brain to go through. I'm just going to take off this one and use this drawing to show how we're going to take sections coming off. So we're going to sort of expose our midbrain a little bit more than it's exposed. And then we come down, come to our hindbrain. We've got our cerebellum out here, and then our medulla coming here, and our foramen magnum and our cord. So we want to get started with a section through our precentral gyrus. We'll take a coronal section through. So A will be what we do. We need a whole page. So begin at the top of a page, because we're going to be taking this down through the segments. Put some gyri here. And we'll put in the basal ganglia. As we've seen it, as a representative here. So this will be our precentral gyrus. These will be our representative of the basal ganglia for landmarks. Do you remember what basal ganglia did for you? Modifies your motor behavior, keep it smooth and coordinated. And then let's start now with our pyramidal cell up in the precentral gyrus. It's going to be the origin of our cortical spinal tract. We have lots of pyramidal cells up here. And their axons then are going to descend. They have to go through the internal capsule, so they confine in the apex area of the basal ganglia. And what have we developed here? All of these axons in here, I'm just going to put X's here. What do we call the mass of white matter between the cells up here and the cells down in the basal ganglia? Corona radiata. It's white matter, and it's often affected with disease. So they talk about the white matter of the cerebral hemispheres, the corona radiata. So where I put, see, it's only white matter between these cells and these cells. So this equals the corona, the radiating crown, radiata. But clinically, it's used a lot. And then we come down to the area here. This will represent part of the internal capsule, as these fibers are condensed here. Fibers going to and from the cortex are all condensed, and here I'm only giving you one set of fibers. So in red, I've put internal capsule. For cortical spinal tract. Because you'll learn eventually the blood supply of this whole area. Very important. You see, you break a blood vessel here and you're paralyzed. These are your main fibers going down. So let's now take the midbrain section. Where are these fibers going through the midbrain? So we put our colliculi, let you know we're at collicular level, midbrain. What's the name of our former central canal here? Aqueduct, good. Just repeat. And down here on the ventral surface, these are motor fibers, so you're going to see on ventral, not dorsal. This was sensory up here. This was visual, auditory, sensory. This is motor. We'll see our paths coming through here, down here in our cerebral peduncles, but in the middle. There are lots of other fibers going down. I just have to do it this way because I don't have the dimensions, but you realize this is a continuation down. And we pick them up here in the cerebral peduncles. These are cerebral peduncles. And our next area will give the upper medulla. This was midbrain. So you learn the characteristics of each part of the brainstem. That's the beauty of it. No two parts are the same. A real challenge. So my next drawing will be of the upper medulla. Who can tell me what the ventricle will be here over the medulla? 4, sure. Fourth ventricle. And will my motor pathway in the medulla be up here or down here? Up or down? Which is dorsal and which is ventral? This is dorsal, this is ventral. Will motor be dorsal or ventral? Thank you. My, that is so fundamental in learning about your brain. When you've got bleeds, to know the difference. So we have what are called then, they take a pyramidal shape here. These are still the same fibers, but at the medulla level, they look like this. So if you saw something that looked like that, what would you call it? A pyramid. Yes, these are pyramids. So down here, they call it the pyramidal tract if you want to, but it's still the cortical spinal tract, but just going through the medulla. All right, what happens to it next? This was upper medulla. By the time we get to lower medulla, it does something different. So we've got, whoops, don't want that one. Lower medulla looks something like this. This is lower medulla. Whoops, can you check that, please? Thank you. What's happening in the lower medulla to this cortical spinal tract? It's deciding to cross. You think we understand anything about this brain? Why in the world is it going to wait till it gets down here and then cross? So we have what's called the decussation of the pyramids. So it comes from the pyramids and they cross. So this represents the crossing or decussation of the pyramids. But only 80 to 90% of them cross. What do the others do? They continue to stay where they are, and I'll mark them in a different color here. Those in the medial area here will stay here. In green, these are uncrossed. So now, our next section, because what we've taken here, we've taken one here in midbrain. This was A. Then A was up here. Then B will be midbrain. We've taken it through here. And C, this is B, and this is C. Down here, upper medulla would be upper medulla. And then D is lower medulla. So we get them from all directions, so you become familiar with them. So our next one will be E, will be spinal cord. We've reached our destination. E will be spinal cord. And it's become an old friend now. You're familiar with it. Posterior horn, anterior horn. You know we're not in the thoracic cord. How do you know that we're not in thoracic cord? A lateral horn, right. We didn't have time to give you a lateral horn, but if this were a thoracic cord, you have very thin horns because you don't have much muscle mass around your thorax, but you also have a lateral horn. So it differs. It has thin horns and a lateral horn. I'll just slip this in at the moment. And why do we have a thoracic cord that has lateral horns? Because this is the connection of the CNS with the ANS. This is for the ANS. When we get to the ANS, we'll get to that. But I just wanted you to see, if you see one of these like this, you know you're not in thoracic. But we've now crossed and we've brought these fibers up to this position. So who's going to tell me in which funiculus in the cord will this group of fibers descend? In the posterior, in the lateral, or in the anterior? Pardon? Anterior, only the uncrossed. See, they're here. They're going to stay there. But look at what I drew here. They're up here. Where are they going to be over there? Lateral, good for you. Right. So we're going to have them coming down here in the lateral funiculus. So this is still our cortical spinal tract. But we could add a definition to it, where it is, a location, so we'll call it the lateral cortical spinal tract. And this one becomes the medial cortical spinal tract, or anterior. So now it's time, because our destination is the anterior horn cell. Where are we going to find the anterior horn cell? Here or here? One or two? Two, sure. Those are your anterior horns. So there you'll find it. Let's make an anterior horn cell so we can bring in this cortical control, multipolar cell here with its axon going out over the ventral root. So now we'll have fibers that will leave our lateral cortical spinal tract and come over and synapse with our anterior horn. We'll call this 1. 1 will be synapse directly with anterior horn. So is this going to be for refined movement or crude movement? What would you guess? Fine, right. Fine movement. It comes directly to the anterior horn cell. So this is for fine movement. For more generalized movement, my fiber is going to come over to an interneuron. Talked about interneurons. And then down to your anterior horn cell. So for general movement, not this fine movement, we come into an interneuron. And then to the anterior horn cell. And we did this one in blue. Now you say, well, what about this other 10 to 20% that hasn't crossed yet, that's down here in our anterior cortical spinal tract? Well, those fibers, these will cross at the segment in the cord where they're going to leave the cord. These will cross in segment of cord where exit cord, let's put. So they will eventually, further down, I'm not going to draw a full picture for them, they'll come in and cross. But that's a fascinating system in itself. Why in the world is it doing all this? All right, now we want to talk about what are known as upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons, because when they're damaged, they bring about completely different symptoms. So our upper motor neuron will be our pyramidal cell. That's an upper motor neuron, because we've seen we have two neurons in this tract. Its axon will come down to an anterior horn cell where we'll have the lower. This is anterior horn cell, is our lower motor neuron. And as neurologists, they have to know the difference in what happens if I cut here, have an automobile accident, my cord gets cut as it's in its lateral cortical spinal tract, and what are going to be the symptoms versus a cut that I get down that impinges on my anterior horn cell. So this is called an upper motor neuron lesion. And we'll see various clinical symptoms. The first is called flaccid paralysis. Flaccid paralysis. And what is that? That's a very weak or feeble paralysis. Not a strong one. It's a weak, feeble paralysis. Shortly after the injury, it'll change. That's one characteristic. It'll change to a spastic paralysis. A spastic paralysis. And the spastic paralysis will be a continuous contained paralysis, but it's not a strong one, but it's a continuous one. Continuous paralysis. The next one is that the loss of superficial reflexes. Loss of superficial reflexes. In the male, that'll be the loss of a cremasteric reflex. You know where your cremasteric muscle is? It's the muscle that's attached to your testis. And when it gets too cold, the testis moves up towards the abdomen when the cremasteric muscle pulls it up. So the cremasteric reflex is a superficial one. You just stroke this muscle and the testis will ascend. In other words, it comes out of the cold. So that's a superficial reflex. 4, you have an exaggeration of deep tendon reflexes. Exaggeration of deep tendon reflexes. And obviously these are easier to test. You just tap your patellar tendon, and if you have an upper motor neuron lesion, instead of just giving a short, it flies up. So if you're testing for it, stand aside because you get kicked in the chin if he really has an upper motor neuron lesion. But I saw one over at UCSF, and the neurologist, this was when I was a student, we were visiting, and they said, well, would you like to see an upper motor neuron lesion? Sure. And so he tapped, and her knee didn't do anything. Tapped, and he was so embarrassed because this is supposed to demonstrate. Turned out she had on woolen underwear that was that thick under her slacks. That wasn't even getting through to her tendon. So to let you know, as young physicians, if you're tending, be sure you're tapping the tendon and not all the underwear. All right. Exaggeration, deep tendon reflexes, that'll be the knee jerk. And the last one is a positive Babinski. A positive Babinski. Whoops. Trying to hurry here. We've got so much to cover and we're not making it. Okay, positive Babinski. And what is this? You stroke the sole of the foot. Your toes are usually like this. If you have an upper motor neuron lesion, the toes will fan out. So, stroke sole of foot. But you have to stroke it with something, not just with your hand. When we saw this same doctor, he used his keys. Just took a key and struck, and the toes went up. So you have to really get the impulse through. Sole of foot and the toes will fan out. So that's a positive Babinski. So the sure ones that are easy to test would be the positive Babinski and the exaggerated deep tendon reflexes. That'll let you know that you're on the right track for an upper motor neuron lesion, because the lower motor neuron lesions are fairly obvious and easy for you to figure out. A lower motor neuron lesion. This is going to be, we've damaged our anterior horn cell. Where's it going? Skeletal muscle, right? Remember your skeletal muscle with peripheral nuclei? So it's going to muscle, and we've cut it. So what will we see? Loss of reflexes. We have no function from the muscle. Loss of reflexes. With time, the muscle will atrophy. You need your nerve connection to your muscles for them to stay healthy. You cut them, muscle dies. Atrophy of muscle. And what happens? You get paralysis. So what used to be the well-known disease that attacks these? Polio. The polio virus, the virus of polio, myelitis. And you see the people without the muscles in the leg, if it attacks just the lumbosacral anterior horn cells. But it gives you an idea of why it's important to know your pathways, their connections with the nerves, and the symptoms related to them. So with that, we'll move on to the cerebral hemispheres. And as we said, the cerebral hemispheres account for about 85% of your brain. I mean, they're that big, massive amount. And the cerebral cortex will be the few layers of cells that cover these hemispheres. What does cortex mean? It means bark. So these are the outer layers of cells on the hemispheres. They're only, your occipital cortex is only a millimeter thick. It's very thin. Its thickest. Frontal cortex is thicker. Gets up to 4 millimeters. Occipital down to 1. So we've talked about the cortex because we've talked about the bones on the outside, so we know what our lobes are. We've had them, but we didn't get them in much detail. We'll see how much detail we can give you. Because some of you will want to go into embryology and find out how these nerve cells migrate to where they are, how they know how to get there, how they know what transmitter to give. I mean, all the decisions that these cells have. Do you feel tired just thinking about them? I mean, all that time I was using all those cells for my motor activities, right? For talking, that had to be synchronized with hand movement, which was cortical spinal versus cortical bulbar. It's just so phenomenal. So now we're cerebral hemispheres. We're going to take the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is the largest. Behind your forehead. And we've already had parts of it, but I want to give other terminology which is used clinically. So we've had our precentral gyrus, right? this is our precentral gyrus. And now we're going to introduce Broadman's terminology, because this is used frequently. Broadman, lots of people have given numbers to the cortex so that you can talk about area 2, 3, 4, but Broadman's has been one that has stayed. So he has the numerical designation of cerebral cortex. So, precentral gyrus is going to be area 4. Talk about area 4, you know exactly where you are. We said the precentral gyrus gave rise to the cortical spinal tracts. But other areas that we're going to develop will participate. We'll mention those as well. Let's go first. This is our refined motor for precentral. Then we go to premotor. Premotor is 6. So it's for more generalized motor, less specific motor. Where I like it is on the medial aspect. What is 6 doing on the medial aspect? It's called supplementary motor on the medial aspect of the hemisphere, where we have our corpus callosum in here. We have our central sulcus here. Then this would be area 6 on the medial aspect, 4 behind it. This is supplementary motor. What's it doing for you? It's visually planning your motor activity before you ever execute. How many of you are divers? How many have ever been off 3-meter boards? Cats, we were always on those as kids. That's what you do growing up in Southern California. You did your flips, you did all of this, but before you left the end of that board, you planned what you were going to do. Watch the Olympic divers. They stand there before they ever go off and twist and do everything. That's premotor supplementary planning. Isn't it wonderful? I mean, you do it when you're on the basketball court. I mean, you're deciding how much, whoops, I'm on the basketball court when I'm supposed to be finished. But this is supplementary motor for planning motor activity. Fascinating area. I'm going to give you one more. I'm going to give you area 8. These are for frontal eye fields. We know vision's all way back in the occipital, but here we are in the frontal. These are for conjugate eye movements. We've talked about those before. So we're seeing a lot of this frontal lobe is motor. But this is both eyes working together. So let's look at our slides, and we'll finish this next time. All right, here's our cortex as we see it from the side. We'll have our central sulcus will be coming down here. Here's central sulcus, postcentral gyrus, precentral gyrus, and then we just gave the premotor area, and then the frontal eye fields here. In the next one, and this shows that you'll have we said a sensory homunculus on your postcentral gyrus. Well, you have a motor homunculus on your precentral gyrus. Again, I asked you, why is this right side up and the rest of the body is upside down? Nobody gave me an answer yet. In the next one, and this is showing the corona radiata. Here's my cortex out here on the gyri and sulci. The axons have to get all the way down to either, as cortical bulbars, to cranial nerve nuclei and the brainstem, or cortical spinal, anterior horn cells. In the next one, and this shows again, here your basal ganglia. I'm sorry, this is an unstained brain, so you can see how dark they are just because of pigmentation and blood vessels. Here was your caudate, here was your putamen and your globus pallidus. The fibers are coming from here. They're coming down by the genu of the corpus callosum here and going on to the next one. Next one, please. And down here were our cerebral peduncles, colliculi, aqueduct, substantia nigra, all midbrain. But this part of our peduncles will be our cortical spinal tracts traveling down. You break a blood vessel here, you'll get paralyzed. Next one. Now we're down at upper medulla, and you'll learn someday what the characteristics are. This nucleus here will tell you it's upper medulla, but here are your pyramids, pure tracts coming down. Next one. And now they're crossing, and it gets sort of messy when they cross. It's not as pretty a picture as it usually is. Anybody tell me what group of cells these would be? Do you remember the tract gracilis? These would be the nuclei for the gracilis. Just to see if you could figure things out. Here we go. So we're going to cross. Let's see the next one. It'll be less crossing. It's hard to get one that does it just like we do on the blackboard. But all this mess is crossing. In the next one, and here we are down in the cord. So we're going to be out here in the lateral funiculus with our lateral, cortical, spinal tract, and our anterior cortical spinal tract in the anterior funiculus. Here were our posterior tracts in the posterior funiculi. In the next one. And we didn't get as far as we wanted to, so I can't go on with the rest of the gyri on this. Let's see one more. Do I have one more? Or was that it? Yes, it will be visual cortex. We'll get it next time. But here's your supplementary motor cortex up here for planning your activity. All right?